The Wind River was wild that June, loud as thunder and mean as a stampede. Eli Walker was filing a horseshoe by his coral when a thin cry cut through the roar. It was not a hawk, not a cat, not any sound the high country should carry. It was a woman. He dropped the file, Andron. The river churned brown and angry, chewing up branches and whole trees. Then he saw her. A dark dress tangled in a fallen cottonwood, pale face turned to the sky. One arm hooked to a slick limb while the current tried to tear her loose. Eli shoved off his boots, threw his gun belt aside, and hit the water. The cold punched the breath from him. Logs bumped his ribs. Grit ground between his teeth. He fought anyway, the way a man fights when the choice is simple. Get her or watch her die. He reached the tree, braced on a thick limb, and grabbed her arm. Her skin was Her head lulled. Something trapped her leg under the water. He took a breath, went under, and worked blind in the dark pool of the river. Wood scraped his knuckles. His lungs burned. At last the snag gave. He came up with her and kicked for shore until his legs shook. They fell onto the muddy bank in a tangle of wet cloth and riverweed. For a long moment there was only the noise of water and the pound of his own heart. Then she coughed hard. Dirty water ran from her mouth. Her eyes opened, a moss green, hazy with pain and fear. "You're safe," he said, voice rough. "You're on my land near the Wind River." She tried Toset. Her dress clung to her like a-second skin. She crossed her arms over her chest and shivered so hard her teeth clicked. "You need a fire," he said. "My cabin is close." "Please," she whispered, pulling back. "Do not take me to town. I'm not taking you to town," he held her gaze. "But you'll freeze out here." She searched his face as if the wrong look would mean death. At last she gave a small nod. When she tried to stand, her knees buckled. Eli lifted her. She was light as a scarecrow in a storm. A soaked leather satchel bumped his arm, still tied to her wrist. He shouldered the door of his cabin open and carried her to the chair by the hearth. The room was small and plain. Stone fireplace, narrow cot, a rough table, 2 chairs, shelves with coffee beans and a few books. The smell was wood smoke and quiet. "Get those wet things off," he said, turning his back as he fed the fire. The words came out like an order, but it was only sense. He set coffee to boil, poured a shot of whiskey into both cups, and set one within her reach. When he finally looked, she was wrapped in his spare blanket, her dress and underthings hanging to steam over the other chair. A purple bruise darkened her cheek. Her hair lay in wet ropes over her shoulders. She held the cup in both hands like it might warm her bones from the inside. "My name is Eli Walker," he said. It felt strange to say his name out loud in this quiet place. "Clara Jensen," she answered. They drank insolence. The fire snapped. A log echoed like a gunshot and she flinched. He saw then what fear can carve into a face. He set a tin plate of bacon and beans in front of her. At first she shook her head. Then hunger won and she ate careful and slow. "The river will not drop by morning," he said. "You're stuck here a spell." Her shoulders sagged for a second. The pride fell away and he saw only a worn-out soul. A tear cut a clean line through the dirt on her cheek. "My husband died," she said, staring at the flames. "He gambled. He left debts. The men who came wanted our place. They said it was theirs. I rode at night. I did not know the river would be like that." Eli stood at the window. The pines on the ridge did not move. Heck knew those men not by name but by type. He had seen their work. "Eat," he said. "You'll need your strength." When night came, so did the quiet. He laid his bedroll near the fire and left the cot for her. He stretched out on the floor, hands behind his head, and stared at the dying coals. He could hear her breathing. Could feel her in the room like a new scent you cannot ignore. Soft feet moved behind him. He kept his eyes on the embers. "Mr. Walker," she whispered. "What is it?" "Your shirt," she said. "The blue one from the war." "Is it clean?" He frowned. He kept that old Union shirt folded in a chest. The color had washed to a pale gray. He did not know why he still had it. His silence hung. He could hear the wind under the door. When she spoke again, her voice was small and raw. "Do you want to look at me?" The words hit him like a shock. He did not turn. He did not move. She rushed on as if afraid the air would swallow her whole. "Will you stay if I undress?" He heard more than the offer. He heard years of trade and shame. He heard the price the world had taught her she had to pay for help. Heat rose in his chest, not desire but anger, at her sorrow and at the kind of men who made it. He turned just enough to see her shape in the firelight. She stood with the blanket clutched tight, shaking. Then he turned his back again and stared hard into the coals. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Jensen," he said, voice low. "No one will bother you here." Nothing moved for a long time. Then the cot rose creaked. A soft, broken sound slipped into the dark, a sob she could not hide. Eli lay stiff on the floor and listened to the river and her quiet crying. He felt something he had locked up tight for years crack down the middle. Dawn came pale over the mountains. He was already up. Coffee on the boil. Clara rose late, a limp in her right leg. The blanket wrapped tight until she ducked behind a hanging cloth to dress. When she stepped out, she would not meet his eyes. The shame of the night sat on her like a heavy coat. "The river is still high," he said from the door. "You're safe here until it drops." "I see," she said. They fell into a hard, simple rhythm. She weeded the garden and hauled water with careful steps. He chopped wood and rode the fence line. They spoke little, but he watched the way her hands moved, neat and sure, and how she startled at sharp sounds. She watched him too, learning the shape of his quiet. They were two hurt animals caught by high water, sharing the same small fire, waiting for the river to fall. On the fourth morning, a rider showed on the ridge. It was Jed from the main ranch, easy two-spot on his tall bay. Clara stepped at the doorway, the color draining from her face. "Who is that?" she asked. "Just a hand," Eli said. "He will not bother you." Jed swung down by the corral and tipped his hat. His eyes slid to Clara, curious and sharp. "Walker the bossest if you need supplies. Crossing at Flat Rock is passable if Eamon is careful." He lowered his voice only a little. "Town is buzzing. Folks are talking about the widow Jensen." Clara flinched. Eli's jaw set. "What are they saying?" "Say Silas died over cards, say he owed hard men, say the land is gone. Some call her trouble." Jed shifted uneasy. "Sheriff put a notice on the claim. Creditors laid hands on it." Clara stepped back into the shadows. When Jed rode off, the quiet he left felt heavy and mean. "He was right," she said, staring at the hearth. "Silas died in a fight. He drank, he left debts, and the claim was never mine. Our marriage was a trail wedding. No papers were filed. In the law's eyes, I was no wife. I was only a woman in his house." Her voice thinned. "I had to leave." Quote, Ella leaned on the doorframe and looked out at the hard blue sky. "Promises our wordsmen break." He said, "I know it." He told her then in plain pieces about his brother Samuel, 17 and bold, who enlisted after him and died in a camp, and about Eleanor, who married a merchant while Eli was still marching somewhere in the mud. "I came home 2 graves and a closed door," he said. "Since then I keep to myself." That night a north wind rattled the eaves. Clara grew hot and glassy-eyed. By midnight she shook with fever. Eli sat by the cot with a basin and a rag, cooling her face, her wrists, her throat. The fire threw long shadows up the log walls. Near dawn her eyes cleared. She looked at his hand on her brow and gripped it. "You are the only one who has touched me without wanting something," she murmured, then slid back into rough sleep. The words cut him deep and true. He kept his seat until the fever broke with the light. When she woke, the river had dropped to a lower growl. She came out in his old faded army shirt, sleeves rolled, bare legs damp with grass. Morning washed her clean. She stood by the wind river and met his eyes. "Can I stay a little longer?" she asked. There was no fear in it, only a small brave hope. He nodded once. "The crossing is still bad for days," he said. "You can work for your keep. I do not keep charity." A new rhythm began. She baked bread, tended the garden, mended his shirts with neat stitches. He cut posts, checked cattle, split wood. They learned each other in small ways. He left a fresh bucket by the door each morning. She set a hot cup on the hearth each noon. They spoke little, but some quiet between them turned warm. On a bright afternoon, she rode his buckskin drum along the river flats, hair loose in the wind. A sudden crumble of earth sent her sliding down a shallow ravine. Drum spooked and tore free. Eli heard the cry and ran, heart pounding. He found her sitting in the dust, shaken but whole. He hauled her up by the shoulders, hands moving over her arms and back to be sure. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, trembling. Relief hit him like a blow. He pulled her tight to his chest and held on. The world narrowed to the hammer of her pulse and the feel of her breath against his shirt. He tipped her chin and almost kissed her. Then he saw the old duty in her eyes, the echo of that first night's bargain, and he stopped. He let her go, turned away, and calmed the horse with unsteady hands. The air in the cabin that night was full of things unsaid. After supper, she stood in the firelight wearing his old blue shirt. Her fingers went to the buttons, slow and sure. The shirt slipped from her shoulders and fell at her feet. She stood in her thin shift, scars pale ass threads on her back. "Will you stay this time?" she asked, voice steady, eyes wet. Eli stepped to her and cupped her face. Desire rose in him like a tide, strong and clean. I want you, he said, raw and honest, but not because you think you owe me. Her whole body shook. Tears fell soundless down her cheeks. Words spilled torn and true. Kansas drought. Dead parents. A hungry girl taking what she could to live. A life with Silas that was bruises and fear. He held her and told her what he knew from the war. That does not make you less. He said it makes you brave. 2 days later, Jed came hard again, dust boiling behind his horse. Walker, Amon in Lander is asking about her. Amos Jensen, Silas's brother, says she ran with his money. He is reeing men and the sheriff is listening. Clara went cold. Eli saddled Drum and a gentle mare. We go speak for ourselves, he said. We will not hide. Sheriff Brody's office smelled of dust and tobacco. Brody was thick through the middle and liked the weight of his badge. Your brother-in-law says you stole a strong box, he told Clara. 2 men will swear they saw it. There was no strong box, Clara said. My husband left debts. I left with my life. Brody looked Eli over with a lazy smirk. I know you, Walker. Quiet man up the river. Best stay that way. This woman is trouble. Turn yourself in and let the court work. Eli saw old blind certainty in the man's eyes, the same kind that sent boys to die. He took Clara's arm and walked out to the street. We cannot go back to the cabin, he said. We ride south and think. They found shelter in a broken barn on the open plain. In the dark, Clara's strength snapped under the weight. She wept like a storm. When the tears fell quiet, she told the rest. The scars were Silas's. The winter her baby died was not the weather's fault. She had hidden a small canvas bag of her-own coins, saved over years for an escape. Amos knew and wanted it. Eli took her cold hand and pressed it to his chest. If they want you, he said, voice low and hard, they have to take me too. She kissed him, fierce and desperate and alive, and he answered in kind. What passed between them was not payment. It was a claim on hope. In the flicker of Asmal fire, they learned how to give without taking. In the morning, they chose to fight. Eli found the barkeep in Lander, who said Amos had been buying drinks after the burial. He found Peterson next to the old homestead, who whispered that Amos had hauled off a cradle and quilts and called it settling debt. Then Eli climbed the stairs to Judge Miller, a Union veteran with iron in his spine. The judge listened, weighed the man in front of him, and agreed to hear the matter before trouble turned deadly. They took a room at the boarding house. The town watched and whispered. That same morning, a blacksmith's daughter went into early labor down the hall. The doctor was gone. Clara rolled up her sleeves and went in. Hours later, a baby cried sharp and new, and the hallway women looked at Clara with different eyes. They never made it to the judge that day. Boots pounded the steps. The door crashed open. Amos filled the frame with 2 hired guns at his shoulders. His face was red with whiskey and hate. You are coming with me, he snarled. She is not, Eli said, placing his body between them. A knife flashed. In the tight hall, Eli knocked one strike aside with the heavy barrel of his pistol, but the second drove under his ribs. Heat bloomed in his side. He staggered. Clara screamed. The gun fell to the floor by her bare feet. One of the men raised his pistol toward Eli's chest. Clara grabbed Eli's fallen colt with both hands, arms shaking, and fired. The blast thundered in the narrow hall. The hired man reeled back, howling, clutching his shoulder. Eli slid down the wall, hand clamped to the wound, face gray. Clara dropped to her knees and cradled his head. Eli, stay with me, she cried. Please do not leave me. Shouts rose from the street. Sheriff Brody and Judge Miller appeared at the top of the stairs, the judge's voice cutting like a whip. Enough, Sheriff. Arrest Amos Jensen and these men for assault and intimidation. Clara did not hear them. Her world had shrunk to the weight of Eli's head in her lap, and the slow, frightening warmth on her hands. His eyes fluttered. She pressed her forehead to his. Stay, she whispered. Stay. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. Eli did not die that night. The knife had gone deep, but by grace or luck, it missed his lung. The doctor said it was the stubborn kind of wound that could kill a weaker man. But Eli Walker wasn't weak. He spent the next weeks in a bed at the boarding house, half in pain and half in dreams, and Clara was always there. She never left his side. She changed his bandages, cooled his fever, and read to him from an old book the judge had lent them. When he woke in the night, shaking and calling names from a war long past, she whispered softly, until the ghosts left him be. You're not there, she'd say, her voice steady. You're here with me. The war is over, Eli, you're safe. Her words worked like medicine. His breathing would slow, his fists unclench, and before long he'd drift into sleep again. It was the first time in years his nightmares had met kindness instead of silence. When he was strong enough to stand, she helped him to the window. The town outside was changing. Folks who had once whispered about her now nodded as she passed. Word of her courage had spread. The woman who brought the blacksmith's child into the world. The woman who faced armed men and saved her wounded cowboy. Even Sheriff Brody, red-faced with guilt, tipped his hat when he saw her. Judge Miller cleared her name before the town. Amos Jensen and his hired men were bound for prison. Clara's truth, once buried under shame, now stood open in daylight. But to her, none of that mattered more than the man who had stood for her when no one else would. One afternoon, sunlight fell through the window like a blessing. Ellis stood beside her, his hand heavy on her shoulder for balance. "The charges are gone," he said quietly. "Amos will pay for what he did. You're free now, Clara." She smiled, but there was a softness in her eyes that made him ache. "You say that like it doesn't include you," she whispered. He turned toward her, weathered face open in a way it had never been before. "I've got nothing to offer you," he said. "Just an old cabin and a heart patched together more times than I can count." Quote. Clara shook her head, a single tear tracing her cheek. "You've already given me everything. You gave me back myself." He reached for her, then slow and unsure, like a man afraid to touch something holy. "I want to wake up beside you every morning," he said. "If you'll have me." She pressed her palm to his cheek, smiling through her tears. "Only if you'll have a woman with too many ghosts." He kissed her there in the golden light of late afternoon, and it wasn't the kiss of rescue or desperation. It was quiet, full of truth and the promise of peace. A week later, they stood beneath a wide cottonwood by the Wind River, the same river that had tried to take her life. Judge Miller read the vows. The blacksmith and his wife stood witness with their newborn son. Clara wore a blue dress she had sewn herself, the color of morning sky. Eli's old army shirt was clean and pressed beneath his vest. When the judge declared them husband and wife, Clara lifted her face to the sun and asked the question that had once carried all her fear. "Will you stay now?" Quote. Eli smiled and pulled her close, his voice steady as the mountains. "I've been staying since the night I found you." They built a new home together, a small white cabin on Therese above the river. He built the porch wide so she could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset burn gold over the peaks. She filled the windows with flowers and the rooms with laughter that had been missing from both their lives too long. The people of Lander came to respect them. Some still whispered, but whispers can't live where work and kindness grow. Clara became the woman the town called on when a child was due or a heart was broken. Eli mended fences, helped neighbors rebuild barns after storms, and kept the coffee hot for anyone who rode up his trail. Years passed gentle and full. They still carried their scars, but they carried them together. Some nights when the wind howled down from the pines, Clara would wake and find Eli staring at the dark, his eyes haunted. She'd take his hand and whisper, "You're not there, you're home." And he would breathe again. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, they rode side by side along the river. The water ran clear now, calm and steady. Clara reached out and took his hand, their fingers interlacing. He looked at her, and for the first time in his long life his heart felt light. They'd come through fire and flood, shame and sorrow. What remained was quiet, honest love, the kind that does not fade, the kind the wind remembers. And as they rode on, the river sang below them, carrying away everything that once tried to drown.